Have you ever noticed a strange pattern in your relationships? You meet someone who is kind, emotionally present, and genuinely interested in getting to know you. Yet something inside you remains strangely quiet. There is no overwhelming excitement, no obsessive thinking, no irresistible pull. Then someone else appears. They are distant, difficult to read. Their affection comes in small, unpredictable moments. Sometimes they seem deeply interested. Other times they disappear without explanation, and suddenly, you can't stop thinking about them. You replay every conversation. You wait for every message. You analyze every silence. Your entire emotional world begins orbiting around someone who never truly lets you get close. If this has happened more than once, you may have asked yourself a painful question. Why do I always attract emotionally unavailable people? But Buddhist psychology invites us to ask a different question, one that is far less comfortable. Perhaps you are not attracting emotionally unavailable people. Perhaps your mind is repeatedly moving toward them. There is an important difference, because if the problem exists only in other people, there is very little we can change. But if the pattern lives within our own mind, then freedom becomes possible. This is not about blame. It is about understanding. The Buddha often encouraged people to look beyond appearances and investigate the hidden causes beneath suffering. When a person experienced repeated disappointment, he did not simply ask what happened. He asked, "What is the mind holding on to?" This question changes everything. Because according to Buddhist psychology, suffering rarely begins with external events. It begins with the way the mind relates to those events. And nowhere is this more visible than in love. Most people believe they fall in love with another person, but the mind often falls in love with something much more subtle: possibility, hope, fantasy, uncertainty. The promise that if this one person finally chooses us, everything inside us will feel complete. Notice how quickly the relationship becomes larger than the person. We stop seeing who they actually are. Instead, we begin chasing what they represent: acceptance, validation, belonging, security, wholeness. The emotionally unavailable person becomes more than a human being. They become the imagined answer to an invisible question we have been carrying for years. Am I enough? This is why these relationships can become so psychologically consuming. The less available someone is, the more room the mind has to create stories. They're just afraid of intimacy. They've been hurt before. If I'm patient enough, they'll eventually open up. They love me, they just don't know how to show it. Little by little, imagination replaces reality. We become emotionally attached not to who the person is, but to who we hope they might become. This is one of the first great insights of Buddhist psychology. The mind suffers not only because it clings to reality, but because it clings to possibility. And possibility has no limits. Reality eventually reveals itself. Fantasy never has to. Imagine trying to hold on to a cloud. The harder you reach, the more beautiful it seems. But the closer you come, the more impossible it becomes to grasp. Many emotionally unavailable relationships feel exactly like this. The distance itself becomes part of the attraction, not because suffering is pleasurable, but because uncertainty awakens craving. The Buddha described craving as one of the deepest forces shaping human experience. In Pali, this is called taṇhā. It is often translated simply as desire. But craving is more than wanting something. Craving whispers, "I cannot be at peace until I have this." This is where emotional suffering begins. Because craving does not simply appreciate, it insists. It does not quietly enjoy. It reaches, it grasps, it refuses to let go. When craving enters relationships, love slowly changes its nature. Instead of seeing another person clearly, we begin pursuing the emotional relief we imagine they can provide. Their attention becomes medicine. Their approval becomes proof. Their affection becomes evidence that we are finally worthy. Without realizing it, we hand them the keys to our emotional world. And the less they give, the more valuable their attention begins to feel. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as intermittent reinforcement. When rewards arrive unpredictably, the mind often becomes more attached than when they arrive consistently. Think about a slot machine. If it never pays out, people eventually stop playing. If it pays out every single time, there is little suspense, but when rewards come randomly, the mind becomes obsessed. It keeps pulling the lever, not because of certainty, but because of uncertainty. Relationships can operate in remarkably similar ways. One affectionate message after days of silence. One vulnerable conversation after weeks of emotional distance. One unexpected compliment after repeated indifference. These small moments create enormous hope. The mind begins believing, maybe things are changing, and hope becomes fuel for attachment. From a Buddhist perspective, this is a fascinating moment, because craving feeds not on what already exists, but on what might exist. The future becomes emotionally intoxicating. If I just wait a little longer, if I love them enough, if I understand them deeply enough, maybe they'll finally choose me. Notice how the mind quietly postpones peace. Happiness becomes conditional. Not now. Later. After they change. After they commit. After they become emotionally available. The Buddha observed this tendency everywhere. The human mind continuously moves happiness into the future. It says, "I'll finally be at peace when I earn enough, when I succeed, when I'm admired, when I'm loved, when this person finally sees my worth." But peace built upon conditions is always fragile, because conditions constantly change. This is why chasing emotionally unavailable people can feel strangely addictive. There are moments of hope, then disappointment, moments of closeness, then distance, moments of emotional warmth, then coldness again. The cycle itself becomes hypnotic. Many people mistake this emotional intensity for love, but intensity is not always intimacy. Sometimes intensity is simply uncertainty amplified by craving. There is a subtle difference. Real intimacy creates safety. Craving creates obsession. Intimacy allows rest. Craving rarely lets the mind relax. Have you noticed how exhausting these relationships often become? You replay conversations before sleeping. You wonder what every message means. You imagine future conversations that have never happened. You rehearse explanations. You search for hidden meanings behind simple words. Your body may be sitting quietly in a room, but your mind is running endless simulations. This constant mental activity is not a sign of profound love. It is often a sign of attachment, searching for certainty. Buddhist meditation invites us to observe this process directly. Sit quietly for a few moments. Notice what happens when someone you long for enters your thoughts. Does the mind simply observe, or does it immediately begin creating stories? Planning, remembering, imagining, worrying. Craving rarely stays still. It produces movement, it searches, it negotiates with reality, it keeps asking, what do I need to do to finally receive what I want? This endless movement creates psychological restlessness. In Buddhism, restlessness is not merely a personality trait. It is one of the mind's habitual reactions to craving. The more desperately we seek completion outside ourselves, the less peaceful the mind becomes. Ironically, the very relationship we believe will calm us often becomes the greatest source of our anxiety. This is one of the paradoxes the Buddha repeatedly pointed toward. The object of craving promises relief. Yet craving itself creates suffering. Think about someone waiting anxiously for a message. For a brief moment, they believe, if they text me, everything will be okay. Then the message arrives. There is relief, perhaps even joy, but notice what happens next. Soon, another silence begins. Another uncertainty. Another emotional wave. The relief never lasts. The mind begins craving again. This cycle is important to understand because it reveals something deeper. The suffering is not caused only by the other person's emotional distance. It is maintained by the mind's inability to rest without external reassurance. This does not mean emotionally unavailable behavior is healthy. It is not. But Buddhist psychology gently redirects our attention. It asks, why has my peace become dependent on someone else's availability? That question is uncomfortable, but it is also liberating because it shifts our attention from changing another person to understanding our own mind. And perhaps this is the first step toward breaking the cycle. Not finding someone different immediately, but seeing clearly why the same pattern keeps feeling irresistible. Because once the mechanism becomes visible, its power begins to weaken. Yet, an even deeper mystery remains. Why does uncertainty feel so much more exciting than stability? Why can a person who gives us almost nothing occupy our thoughts more than someone who offers genuine love? The answer has very little to do with romance, and almost everything to do with an invisible hunger that most of us have been carrying long before we ever fell in love. That hidden hunger is where our journey goes next. If emotionally unavailable people are not the true source of our suffering, then what is? The Buddha often encouraged his students not to stop at the first answer the mind offered. Whenever suffering appeared, he invited them to keep looking deeper, beneath anger, beneath fear, beneath desire, until they discovered the root. And perhaps the root of this particular suffering is not the unavailable person at all. Perhaps it is the invisible hunger that quietly lives within us. Not physical hunger, not even emotional hunger in the ordinary sense, but a subtle feeling that something essential is missing. Many people spend their entire lives trying to silence this feeling. Some pursue wealth, others chase success, some become obsessed with recognition, and many seek romantic love, not simply because they wish to share life with another human being, but because they hope another person will finally quiet the restlessness inside. Without realizing it, they begin asking relationships to answer questions that no relationship was ever meant to answer. Am I worthy? Am I enough? Do I deserve to be loved? These are not questions about another person. They are questions about ourselves. Yet the mind often believes someone else holds the answers. This is why emotionally unavailable people can become so psychologically captivating. They seem to possess something we believe we lack. Their affection begins to feel like proof that we matter, proof that we are lovable, proof that we have finally become enough. And because they give that proof only occasionally, the mind values it even more. Imagine someone walking through a desert. Every drop of water suddenly feels priceless. Not because water itself has changed, but because thirst has intensified its value. The same thing happens psychologically. When the heart feels internally deprived, even the smallest gesture of affection can appear extraordinary. A simple compliment, a brief moment of vulnerability, a late-night phone call, a smile. The emotionally hungry mind magnifies these moments. Not because they are objectively extraordinary, but because they temporarily relieve an inner thirst. This is one of the great paradoxes of craving. Craving exaggerates the value of whatever promises relief. The Buddha observed this everywhere in human experience. A hungry mind does not see clearly. It sees selectively. It notices whatever appears capable of ending its discomfort. This is why people often overlook obvious warning signs. Friends may gently say, "They aren't treating you well. They're emotionally unavailable. You deserve better." But the craving mind hears something different. They just don't understand. The mind protects its attachment, because letting go would mean facing the emptiness it has been trying to escape. This is an important point. Sometimes we do not fear losing the other person. We fear meeting ourselves without them. Silence can become frightening, not because silence is painful, but because it removes distraction. When there is no one left to chase, no message to wait for, no relationship to analyze, we are left alone with our own mind. And many people discover something surprising. The loneliness they thought came from being single was already living inside them long before the relationship began. The relationship simply covered it for a while. This is why the end of a relationship can feel so devastating. It is not only the loss of another person, it is also the return of everything we had postponed feeling. The loneliness, the uncertainty, the insecurity, the questions we hoped love would answer. From the Buddhist perspective, relationships often function like mirrors. They do not create our inner world, they reveal it. A peaceful mind enters a relationship peacefully. An anxious mind enters a relationship anxiously. A craving mind enters a relationship craving. The relationship may influence these tendencies, but it does not invent them. This realization can feel uncomfortable, because it means our suffering is not entirely caused by another person's behavior. Yet it is also profoundly hopeful, because whatever arises in the mind can also be understood, and whatever is understood begins to loosen its grip. The Buddha compared this process to lighting a dark room. You do not fight the darkness. You simply bring awareness. The darkness disappears on its own. The same is true of unconscious attachment. Most people do not choose emotionally unavailable partners consciously. Very few wake up thinking, "I hope I fall in love with someone who cannot meet my emotional needs." Instead, the pattern unfolds quietly. The unavailable person feels mysterious, intriguing, different. There is something almost magnetic about them. But what exactly creates that magnetism? Buddhist psychology suggests that the answer lies in projection. Projection is what happens when the mind fills empty spaces with its own hopes, fears, and desires. An emotionally available person reveals themselves clearly. You know where you stand. There is less room for fantasy. But an emotionally unavailable person leaves many questions unanswered, and unanswered questions invite projection. The mind begins completing the story. They're probably thinking about me. They're just afraid. They'll eventually realize how much I care. Notice what is happening. The relationship exists partly in reality and partly in imagination. As imagination grows, attachment deepens, not because the other person has become more loving, but because the mind has become more invested in its own story. This is why disappointment can feel so shocking. The fantasy collapses. Reality finally appears, and reality often looks very different from what craving imagined. The Buddha repeatedly warned about this tendency. The mind rarely suffers from reality alone. It suffers from reality colliding with expectation. Expectation is powerful. It quietly writes a script for the future. Then it demands that life perform accordingly. When life refuses, the mind experiences frustration. This is true not only in relationships, but everywhere. However, romantic love amplifies the process because identity becomes involved. The unavailable person no longer represents only companionship. They begin representing our future, our healing, our happiness, our imagined life together. The more symbols we place upon another person, the heavier our attachment becomes. Eventually, we are no longer relating to a human being. We are relating to an emotional ideal. This is why reality almost always disappoints. No human being can successfully carry another person's fantasy. Not because they are flawed, but because fantasies are limitless. Reality is not. One of the most liberating teachings in Buddhism is the practice of seeing things as they truly are. Not as we fear them, not as we wish them to be, not as craving imagines them, but as they are. This sounds simple. Yet it may be one of the hardest things the human mind can do, because craving constantly edits reality. It highlights what supports hope and ignores what threatens attachment. Think about how often people excuse behavior they would never accept from anyone else. Days without communication become, they're just busy. Emotional distance becomes, they're protecting themselves. Repeated inconsistency becomes, they're trying. Sometimes these explanations are true. Often they are not. The important question is not whether the explanations are correct. The important question is why the mind needs them so desperately. The answer is simple. Because without them, the attachment begins to crack. And the ego fears that crack. It fears admitting, I have been chasing someone who cannot meet me where I am. That realization can feel heartbreaking. Yet, it is also the beginning of wisdom. The Buddha never suggested that wisdom always feels comfortable. Often, it begins with seeing something we have spent years avoiding. Seeing clearly that love cannot grow where reality is continually denied. Seeing clearly that craving disguises itself as hope. Seeing clearly that no amount of patience can transform fantasy into truth. This does not mean emotionally unavailable people are bad. Many are carrying their own wounds, their own fears, their own forms of attachment. Buddhist compassion reminds us that everyone suffers. But compassion does not require self-abandonment. Understanding another person's pain does not mean sacrificing your own peace. This distinction is essential. Many people confuse compassion with rescuing. They believe, if I love them enough, I can heal them. Yet the Buddha consistently taught that each person must ultimately walk their own path. No one can awaken on behalf of another. In the same way, no one can force another human being into emotional readiness. You may offer kindness, patience, understanding, but you cannot manufacture willingness. Trying to do so creates more suffering, like trying to pull a flower open before it is ready to bloom. Force cannot create openness, only conditions can. And sometimes the wisest act is not holding on tighter, but letting life unfold without resistance. This is where Buddhist psychology begins shifting from understanding suffering toward transforming it. Because once we see that craving, not love, is driving the pursuit, a new possibility appears. Instead of asking, how do I finally make them choose me? We begin asking, what is this longing trying to teach me? That question changes everything. For the first time, the relationship stops being only about another person. It becomes a doorway into self-understanding. A mirror revealing our deepest habits of mind, our fear of being alone, our dependence on validation, our habit of confusing pursuit with intimacy, our tendency to postpone peace until someone else changes. And this is precisely where Buddhist practice begins. Not by changing the world, but by understanding the mind that experiences the world. Because the Buddha did not promise a life free from heartbreak. He offered something far more enduring. A mind that no longer depends on heartbreak to discover its own worth. But before that transformation can happen, we must uncover one final illusion. an illusion so subtle that it shapes nearly every relationship we enter. The illusion that another person has the power to complete what we believe is missing within ourselves. That illusion, and how Buddhism gently dissolves it, will be the heart of our journey in the next chapter. There is a quiet belief that shapes countless relationships. Most people never say it out loud, many are not even aware they carry it. Yet it silently influences who they fall in love with, who they chase, and why they suffer. The belief is this: somewhere in the world there is someone who will finally make me whole. At first glance it sounds romantic. Movies celebrate it. Poems glorify it. Songs repeat it endlessly. You complete me. You are my other half. I finally found the missing piece. These words feel beautiful because they speak to something deeply human: the longing to belong, the longing to be understood, the longing to feel that we are no longer alone in the world. There is nothing wrong with these longings. The Buddha never denied that human beings naturally seek connection. We are social creatures. We thrive through kindness, friendship, and compassion. But Buddhist psychology makes an important distinction. There is a profound difference between seeking connection and seeking completion. Connection enriches life. Completion becomes an impossible demand. Because the moment we believe another person must complete us, we quietly hand them responsibility for something they can never truly provide: our inner peace. And this is where suffering begins. Imagine carrying an empty bowl. At first, you believe it simply needs to be filled. So you search everywhere. Success, recognition, achievement, possessions, relationships. Each one pours something into the bowl. For a moment, it feels full. But slowly, the contents disappear. The emptiness returns. So you search again. The Buddha observed that the human mind behaves in much the same way. It constantly looks outward for what can only be discovered inwardly. This does not mean external things have no value. Friendship has value, love has value, family has value. But none of them were designed to become the foundation of our identity. And yet, that is exactly what often happens. When we meet someone who awakens strong emotions within us, the mind begins weaving an invisible story. This is the person who will finally understand me. This is the person who will heal my loneliness. This is the person who will make life meaningful. Notice what has happened. The relationship is no longer simply a relationship. It has become a rescue mission. Without realizing it, we place impossible expectations upon another human being. Not only must they love us, they must heal us. Not only must they stay, they must silence our fears. Not only must they understand us, they must remove the uncertainty we carry within ourselves. No person can fulfill such expectations. Not because they do not care, but because they are human. Just as changing, just as vulnerable, just as incomplete as we are. This is one of the great paradoxes of romantic love. Two people who are each searching for completion often expect the other to provide it. The result is not peace, it is pressure. The relationship begins carrying more weight than it can bear. Buddhist psychology suggests that this pressure does not arise from love itself. It arises from identification. The mind begins identifying another person with its own happiness. If they stay, I will be okay. If they leave, I will fall apart. This way of thinking quietly transforms love into emotional dependency, because our well-being is no longer rooted within ourselves. It has been outsourced. This is why emotionally unavailable people become especially compelling. Their inconsistency creates the illusion that completion is always just beyond reach. Each small moment of affection feels like progress. Each sign of vulnerability feels like a promise. The mind whispers, "I'm getting closer." Closer to what? Closer to finally feeling whole. Yet that moment never fully arrives, because the feeling of incompleteness was never created by the relationship. The relationship merely became the latest place where the mind tried to escape it. The Buddha illustrated this pattern in many different ways. Although he spoke in a different cultural and historical context, his observations remain astonishingly relevant today. He taught that craving is fueled by ignorance. Not ignorance in the sense of lacking intelligence, but ignorance of how the mind actually works. We mistake temporary relief for lasting freedom. Imagine scratching an itch. For a brief moment, scratching feels wonderful, but if the itch comes from an underlying condition, scratching alone never cures it. In fact, scratching too aggressively may make it worse. Craving often functions in the same way. Receiving affection from someone emotionally unavailable feels relieving. The anxiety quiets. The loneliness softens. Hope returns. But the relief fades quickly. Soon, the mind begins craving another moment, another message, another sign, another reassurance. And because the relief is temporary, attachment deepens. The cycle continues. This is why Buddhist psychology is less interested in the object of craving than in the craving itself. Most people focus entirely on the person. They are emotionally unavailable. They don't know what they want. They keep sending mixed signals. All of these observations may be true, but the Buddha might gently ask another question. What is happening inside your own mind while all this unfolds? That question is remarkably powerful, because for the first time, attention shifts away from changing another person, toward understanding ourselves. Perhaps what hurts us most is not their inconsistency. Perhaps it is the meaning we attach to it. Consider two different people meeting the same emotionally unavailable partner. One eventually says, "They're not ready for the kind of relationship I want," and quietly walks away. Because suffering is shaped not only by circumstances, but by the relationship the mind forms with those circumstances. This is one of the central insights of Buddhist psychology. Events matter, but interpretation matters even more. The mind is never simply experiencing reality. It is continuously creating meaning. When someone fails to respond, the mind may conclude, "I'm not important." When someone withdraws emotionally, it may whisper, "I wasn't enough." Notice how quickly another person's behavior becomes a statement about our own worth. This transformation happens almost instantly. And because it happens so quickly, we rarely notice it. Instead, we simply experience pain. Yet beneath that pain lies a hidden belief. If they truly loved me, I would finally feel complete. This belief is understandable. It is also impossible. No relationship can permanently eliminate insecurity. No partner can remain emotionally perfect. No amount of affection can erase impermanence. Everything changes. Feelings change. Circumstances change. People grow. Bodies age. Even the most loving relationships move through seasons. To demand permanent completion from something impermanent is to ask life to become something it has never been. This brings us to one of the most profound teachings in Buddhism, the teaching of Anattā, often translated as non-self. Many people misunderstand this teaching. They imagine it means we do not exist, or that individuality is an illusion in the ordinary sense. But the Buddha's insight was far more subtle. He observed that what we call the self is not a fixed, permanent entity. It is a constantly changing process. Thoughts arise, feelings arise, memories arise, desires arise, then they pass away. Yet the mind gathers all of these changing experiences together and calls them, "This is me." Relationships often strengthen this illusion. We begin defining ourselves through another person. I am someone's partner. I am the one they love. I am the one they chose. These identities feel stable until circumstances change. Then the entire structure begins shaking. This is why breakups can feel like losing ourselves. Not because another person literally took part of us away, but because the identity we built around the relationship begins dissolving. The pain is real. But Buddhist psychology suggests that much of the suffering comes from confusing identity with awareness. Awareness remains. Identity changes. The mind, however, clings to identity, and clinging always fears loss. Perhaps this is why emotionally unavailable people hold such power over us. Not because they possess something extraordinary, but because we unconsciously believe they possess the missing piece of ourselves. And if that belief remains unquestioned, no relationship will ever truly satisfy us, because every relationship will eventually be asked to carry the same impossible burden, to complete what was never incomplete in the first place. But if another person cannot make us whole, then why does the illusion feel so convincing? Why does the heart continue searching outside itself, even after repeated disappointment? To answer that, we must look even deeper, not at love itself, but at the ego's endless search for validation. For beneath the desire to be loved lies another quieter longing, the longing to prove that we are enough. If another person cannot complete us, why does being chosen feel so powerful? Why does one simple sentence, "I love you," or one unexpected message have the power to brighten an entire day? And why can silence from the very same person leave us questioning our worth? The answer lies in one of the oldest habits of the human mind. Long before we begin searching for love, we begin searching for confirmation. Confirmation that we matter, that we are seen, that we belong. From childhood onward, the mind quietly collects evidence about itself. A smile from a parent, a word of praise from a teacher, acceptance from friends, recognition from society. Piece by piece, the ego begins constructing an identity. It asks one question over and over again: who am I? But instead of looking inward, it searches for the answer in other people's eyes. This is one of the most subtle observations in Buddhist psychology. The ego does not simply want to exist, it wants to be confirmed. It wants evidence that the story it tells about itself is true. I am successful. I am attractive. I am lovable. I am important. Whenever someone validates these identities, the ego feels strengthened. Whenever someone questions them, the ego feels threatened. This is why love becomes so emotionally charged. Because romantic relationships provide one of the strongest forms of validation available. When another person chooses us, it feels as though they have confirmed our value. For a brief moment, the restless question, "Am I enough?" becomes quiet. Not because it has been answered, but because it has been temporarily distracted. The Buddha observed that the mind constantly mistakes temporary satisfaction for lasting peace. This is why validation feels so intoxicating, like drinking salt water when thirsty. For a moment it seems to help, but soon the thirst returns. Then the mind asks for more. More affection, more reassurance, more proof. This is the tragedy of validation. It never says, "You are finally complete." It always whispers just one more sign. The next compliment, the next embrace, the next message, the next promise, the next anniversary, the next declaration of love. The ego is rarely satisfied because its survival depends upon continual reinforcement. This is why emotionally unavailable people become such powerful objects of attachment. They offer validation sparingly, and scarcity increases psychological value. Imagine walking into a room where everyone welcomes you warmly. It feels pleasant. comforting, predictable. Now imagine another room. One person barely notices you. They seem distant, reserved, perhaps even indifferent. Strangely, your attention keeps returning to them. Why? Because uncertainty activates the ego. The ego begins wondering, what do I need to do for them to choose me? Notice the shift. The relationship is no longer about knowing another person. It becomes a project of earning recognition. And the moment love becomes something that must be earned, peace quietly disappears. This is one reason emotionally unavailable relationships feel endless. The finish line keeps moving. Each small sign of affection suggests that complete acceptance is just ahead. The ego keeps chasing, but the destination never arrives. The Buddha compared craving to feeding a fire. Most people believe feeding the fire will extinguish it. Instead, every piece of fuel allows it to burn longer. Validation often works in the same way. Each reassuring moment briefly calms insecurity. Yet it also strengthens dependence upon reassurance. Soon, another confirmation becomes necessary. Another sign, another reminder, another guarantee. This creates an exhausting cycle. The ego becomes like a traveler carrying a bucket with no bottom. No matter how much approval is poured into it, it never stays full. Many people spend decades trying to fill this bucket. Changing careers, changing cities, changing partners, changing appearances, believing the next achievement, the next relationship, the next version of themselves will finally silence insecurity. But Buddhist psychology offers a radically different perspective. The problem is not the size of the bucket. The problem is believing it can ever be filled from the outside. This realization is deeply unsettling because it asks us to question one of our strongest assumptions, that love is something we receive. Instead, Buddhism gently suggests something else. Perhaps love is also something we uncover, not because we create it artificially, but because awareness gradually removes the obstacles preventing it from flowing naturally. This distinction matters. The ego believes I must become worthy of love. Awareness quietly observes. Worthiness was never something another person could grant. The ego constantly compares. Am I more attractive, less successful, more interesting, less lovable? Comparison is one of its favorite strategies because comparison creates identity. I know who I am because I know where I stand. But comparison has no end. Someone will always appear happier, more confident, more desired. If our peace depends upon comparison, peace becomes impossible. This is why social comparison intensifies relationship suffering. We scroll through carefully curated images of smiling couples, romantic vacations, engagement announcements, anniversaries, grand gestures. The mind immediately begins creating stories. Why don't I have that? Why wasn't I chosen like that? What is wrong with me? Notice how quickly another person's life becomes evidence against our own worth. The Buddha warned repeatedly about this tendency. The mind creates suffering not only through craving, but through measuring. Measuring ourselves against imagined standards. Measuring our relationships against fantasies. Measuring our value through external approval. The ego survives by measurement. Awareness survives by observation. Observation simply notices. Measurement judges. This difference changes everything. Imagine standing before a still lake. If the surface is constantly disturbed, it cannot reflect clearly. Likewise, a mind constantly measuring itself cannot see reality. It sees only evaluation. Am I enough? Am I failing? Am I winning? Am I chosen? Awareness does something entirely different. It simply watches these questions arise, without immediately believing them. This is where Buddhist meditation becomes profoundly practical. Many people imagine meditation is about emptying the mind. The Buddha taught something far more subtle. Meditation reveals the habits of the mind. Sit quietly, observe your thoughts. Soon, you may notice something surprising. The mind keeps returning to identity, what others think, how others see you, whether you succeeded, whether you failed, whether someone still loves you. Thought after thought revolves around the same center. Me, my future, my image, my story. The Buddha did not condemn this. He simply invited us to observe it carefully, because once observation becomes clear, identification begins weakening. Instead of saying, "I am unworthy," we begin noticing, "There is a thought saying I am unworthy." Instead of believing, "They ignored me because I have no value," we notice, the mind is creating that interpretation. This small shift is revolutionary, because awareness no longer fuses completely with the ego's story. A space opens. Within that space, freedom becomes possible. Without awareness, every rejection feels absolute. With awareness, rejection becomes an experience, not an identity. Without awareness, another person's withdrawal becomes proof that something is wrong with us. With awareness, it becomes information. Perhaps they are unavailable. Perhaps they are struggling. Perhaps they are simply walking a different path. Not every ending is a judgment. Sometimes it is simply reality unfolding. This perspective softens attachment, not because it eliminates grief, but because it removes unnecessary suffering. Grief says, "I miss this person." The ego adds, "I was never enough." Grief says, "This relationship ended." The ego adds, "No one will ever truly love me." Notice how suffering expands. Not because reality changed, but because identity became involved. The Buddha encouraged people to distinguish between direct experience and mental proliferation. One moment of pain becomes 10,000 thoughts. Those thoughts become stories. The stories become identities. The identities become prisons. This is why mindfulness interrupts suffering at its source, not by suppressing emotion, but by preventing the mind from endlessly multiplying it. Eventually, something remarkable begins happening. The need to be chosen becomes less urgent, not because love has lost its importance, but because self-worth is no longer entirely borrowed from another person's opinion. Relationships become expressions of connection, not desperate attempts at self-definition. This transformation does not happen overnight. It unfolds gradually, like clouds slowly clearing from the sky. At first, we simply notice our craving for validation. Then we begin questioning it. Finally, we discover moments when our peace no longer depends upon being constantly affirmed. These moments are small, quiet, almost easy to overlook. Yet they mark the beginning of genuine freedom. For the first time, love becomes a choice, rather than a psychological necessity. You appreciate another person's presence, but you no longer require them to complete your identity. You welcome affection, but you no longer depend upon it to prove your worth. You enjoy companionship, but you are no longer terrified of solitude. This is not emotional independence in the cold, isolated sense. It is emotional wholeness, a wholeness that allows love to become generous instead of desperate. The Buddha described this transformation not as acquiring something new, but as seeing clearly what has always been true. The mind had mistaken craving for love, validation for worth, being chosen for being whole. Once these illusions begin dissolving, relationships themselves begin changing. We stop chasing people who confirm our wounds. We become capable of recognizing those who nourish peace instead of anxiety. And perhaps that is the greatest paradox of all. The moment we no longer need another person to prove that we are enough, we finally become capable of loving them for who they truly are, not for who we hope they will make us become. This is where Buddhist psychology gently turns from understanding suffering toward the path of liberation. For if craving can be seen, it can also be released, and if attachment can be released, then love itself can take on an entirely different form, not rooted in fear, not driven by lack, but grounded in awareness, compassion, and freedom. That is the journey we now begin. Once we understand the cycle, a new question naturally appears. If craving has been quietly shaping our relationships, how do we stop repeating the same pattern? How do we stop chasing people who cannot meet us emotionally? How do we finally let go? Most people immediately look for external solutions. Find a better partner, set stronger boundaries, delete the number, block the messages, stay busy, meet someone new. These actions may sometimes be necessary. In unhealthy or abusive relationships, distance can be an act of wisdom and self-respect. But Buddhist psychology gently reminds us that changing our circumstances is not always the same as changing our mind. A person can leave one emotionally unavailable relationship, only to find themselves in another 6 months later. Different face, different name, the same emotional pattern. Why? Because the mind carries its habits wherever it goes. The Buddha compared this to planting seeds. Whatever seeds are repeatedly nourished will continue to grow. If the seed of craving remains alive, it will eventually seek another object, perhaps another relationship, another ambition, another identity, another promise that happiness lies somewhere outside the present moment. This is why Buddhist practice begins in an unexpected place, not with changing other people, but with observing the mind itself. This is the heart of Sati, or mindfulness. Mindfulness is often misunderstood in modern culture. Many people think it simply means relaxing, reducing stress, or clearing the mind of thoughts. The Buddha described something much deeper. Mindfulness is the ability to see experience clearly, without immediately becoming lost inside it. Imagine sitting beside a river. Leaves float past on the surface. Some are bright, some are dark, some move quickly, others drift slowly. Now imagine jumping into the river every time a leaf appears. You would be carried wherever the current wished. This is how many of us live. A fearful thought appears, and we become the fear. A lonely feeling appears, and we become the loneliness. A memory of someone we miss appears, and we become the longing. The mind is constantly pulling us into its current. Mindfulness does not stop the river. It teaches us to sit on the riverbank, to observe, to notice, to remain present. For perhaps the first time in our lives, we begin seeing the difference between awareness and the thoughts passing through awareness. This distinction may seem small. In reality, it changes everything. Imagine your phone vibrates. A message arrives, you immediately hope it is from the person you have been thinking about. It isn't. Within seconds, disappointment appears. Then another thought follows. They've forgotten me. Another. They're probably losing interest. Another. I always care more than they do. Before long, your entire emotional state has changed. Yet what actually happened? A phone vibrated. Everything else was added by the mind. The Buddha called this process mental proliferation. One small experience becomes dozens of interpretations. Those interpretations become emotional suffering. Mindfulness interrupts this chain. Instead of automatically believing every thought, we begin asking, what is happening in my mind right now? Notice the wording, not, why are they doing this? But what is happening in me? This simple shift returns us to the only place genuine transformation can occur. our own awareness. At first, this practice feels surprisingly difficult, because craving dislikes being observed. It prefers to remain invisible. Think about how craving behaves. It rarely announces itself honestly. It does not say, "I want emotional validation because I feel incomplete." Instead, it disguises itself. "I just need one conversation. I just need closure. I just need to understand." Sometimes these desires are sincere, but sometimes they are simply craving wearing a more acceptable mask. Mindfulness allows us to recognize the disguise, not with judgment, but with curiosity. The Buddha repeatedly emphasized that awareness should be accompanied by kindness. We are not trying to punish ourselves for craving. We are trying to understand it. Imagine watching a frightened child. If the child is crying, you do not scream louder. You kneel down, you listen, you understand. Our own minds deserve the same compassion. Many people become frustrated when they discover how attached they really are. They think, "I should be over this. I shouldn't still care. I've been meditating for months." But mindfulness is not about forcing emotions to disappear. It is about seeing them clearly enough that they no longer control us unconsciously. There is a profound difference. Suppose jealousy appears. Without mindfulness, jealousy immediately becomes action. Checking their social media, replaying conversations, imagining the worst, seeking reassurance. With mindfulness, something changes. Jealousy still appears, but now awareness quietly notices. There is jealousy. There is fear. There is craving. The emotion has not vanished, but identification has begun weakening. This is one of the deepest gifts of Buddhist practice. You no longer become every passing emotion. You begin relating to it differently, like clouds moving through an open sky. The sky never needs to chase the clouds away. It simply allows them to pass. Likewise, awareness does not need to fight craving. It simply sees craving clearly, and something remarkable begins happening. When craving is fully observed, it starts losing its illusion. Imagine watching a fire carefully. You notice something surprising. The flames do not sustain themselves, they depend entirely upon fuel. Without fuel, the fire gradually fades. Craving works in much the same way. Its fuel is unconscious attention. Every fantasy, every imagined future, every replayed memory, every desperate attempt to control another person's feelings. Each one quietly feeds the fire. Mindfulness does not extinguish the fire by force. It simply stops adding fuel. This is why the practice often feels uncomfortable at first. When we stop feeding craving, the mind protests. It says, "Send one more message. Check one more time. Maybe today will be different." These thoughts can feel incredibly convincing, not because they are true, but because craving has practiced them for years. The Buddha understood this deeply. He knew that habits do not disappear overnight. They soften through repeated awareness, again and again and again. This is why meditation is called a practice, not a performance. There is no perfect session, no final moment where difficult thoughts never arise again. Instead, every moment of noticing is itself part of awakening. Every time we recognize craving without obeying it, a small measure of freedom appears. At first, it lasts only seconds, then minutes. Eventually, entire situations that once consumed us begin losing their power. Perhaps someone takes hours to reply. Previously, anxiety would dominate the day. Now, the feeling still arises, but awareness quietly says, "Ah, there is the old pattern again." Notice the difference. Not, "I am anxious," but "anxiety is present." This subtle shift reflects one of the Buddha's most revolutionary insights. We suffer because we identify with changing mental states. We believe, "My fear is me. My loneliness is me. My rejection is me. Mindfulness gently loosens this identification. Thoughts continue arising. Emotions continue arising. But awareness remains larger than all of them. The Buddha often described this freedom through direct observation rather than philosophical debate. He encouraged people to examine their own experience. Look closely. Can you command every thought to appear? Can you prevent every emotion from changing? Can you stop every memory from fading? If not, why insist they define who you are? This investigation transforms relationships, because gradually another person's behavior loses its ability to dictate your identity. Their affection is appreciated, but no longer required for your existence. Their absence may still hurt, but it no longer destroys your sense of self. This does not happen because you stop loving. It happens because love is no longer confused with possession. And here we arrive at another essential Buddhist principle, upādāna, non-clinging. Many people misunderstand non-clinging. They imagine it means indifference or emotional distance. The Buddha taught neither. Non-clinging does not mean refusing to hold someone's hand. It means refusing to imprison your happiness inside another person's hand. This distinction is subtle, yet life-changing. Imagine holding a beautiful bird. If you squeeze too tightly, you harm it. If you refuse to open your hand at all, fear controls you. But if you hold it gently, without the need to possess it forever, something entirely different becomes possible. That is non-clinging, not rejecting love, not resisting intimacy. Simply releasing the desperate demand that another human being must remain exactly as we wish. Because reality has never made such a promise. Everything changes. Everyone changes, including ourselves. To resist this truth is to exhaust the heart. To accept it is to discover an unexpected peace. And perhaps this is where letting go truly begins. Not by forcing ourselves to stop loving someone. Not by pretending the relationship never mattered, but by seeing, with complete honesty, the difference between love and the craving that quietly hid inside it. For when craving is finally recognized, the heart no longer needs to chase what continually runs away. Instead, it becomes ready to discover a different kind of love. A love rooted not in fear, but in freedom. Not in possession, but in presence. Not in emotional hunger, but in boundless kindness. This is the path the Buddha called liberation, and it begins with something astonishingly simple: the willingness to sit quietly, to watch the mind, and to let each passing wave arise, without needing to become the wave itself. If mindfulness teaches us to see craving clearly, the next question naturally arises: what takes its place? If we stop chasing, if we stop clinging, if we no longer ask another person to complete us, what does love become? Many people secretly fear the answer. They imagine that without craving, love will lose its passion. Without attachment, relationships will become cold. Without emotional dependence, intimacy will disappear. But Buddhism offers a vision that is almost the opposite. It suggests that what disappears is not love, but fear. And once fear begins to loosen its grip, love is finally free to become what it was always capable of being. Imagine standing beside a quiet lake at dawn. When the water is constantly disturbed, it cannot reflect the mountains, the sky, or the rising sun. But when the surface becomes still, everything appears naturally. The Buddha often pointed toward this kind of stillness, not as an escape from life, but as the condition that allows us to see life clearly. The same is true of the heart. A heart constantly agitated by craving cannot love clearly. It confuses possession with devotion, control with care, obsession with intimacy. but a peaceful heart reflects reality without distortion. It no longer asks, "How can this person complete me?" Instead, it begins asking, "How can I meet this person with wisdom and kindness?" This is the beginning of Mettā. Mettā is often translated as loving kindness, but the English words only hint at its depth. Mettā is not romance, it is not attraction, it is not emotional excitement. It is the sincere wish that another being experience genuine well-being. Nothing more, nothing less. Notice how radically different this is from the love most of us were taught to pursue. Craving asks, "What can I receive?" Mettā asks, "What can I offer?" Craving measures. Mettā gives. Craving fears loss. Mettā understands that love is not something that becomes smaller when it is shared. Think about the warmth of sunlight. The sun does not choose one flower while refusing another. It shines naturally, without demanding anything in return. This image appears often in Buddhist teachings because it captures something essential. True love is generous by its very nature, not because it is naive, but because it no longer depends upon transaction. Most relationships begin as exchanges. I'll love you if you love me. I'll stay if you stay. I'll trust you if you never disappoint me. These agreements are understandable, yet they often become fragile because they depend upon constant negotiation. Mettā introduces a different possibility. It says, "I genuinely wish for your happiness," even while recognizing that your happiness cannot be controlled by me. This is not passive acceptance of harmful behavior. If someone repeatedly lies, manipulates, or refuses accountability, loving kindness does not ask us to remain in situations that damage our well-being. The Buddha never taught that compassion requires abandoning wisdom. In fact, wisdom and compassion are inseparable. A doctor may care deeply for a patient while refusing to encourage harmful habits. Likewise, genuine love may sometimes express itself through distance rather than closeness. Sometimes the most compassionate action is to walk away from a relationship that continually feeds suffering for both people. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of Buddhist compassion. Compassion is not rescuing. Compassion is not fixing. Compassion is not sacrificing your peace in the hope of changing another person's mind. Compassion begins by seeing suffering clearly, including your own. This brings us to another beautiful quality cultivated in Buddhism: Karuṇā, compassion. If Mettā is the wish that beings be happy, Karuṇā is the willingness to meet suffering with an open heart. Notice that it does not say, "Remove all suffering immediately." Instead, it teaches us to remain present. How often do we run from pain? When someone withdraws emotionally, we panic. When loneliness appears, we distract ourselves. When grief arrives, we rush to replace what was lost. The Buddha invited a different response. Stay, breathe, observe. Let the experience reveal its teaching before trying to escape it. Imagine sitting beside a friend who has just experienced heartbreak. Would you tell them, "Don't feel sad. Move on. Forget about it"? Probably not. You would simply sit with them. You would listen. You would allow their pain to unfold without trying to erase it. Karuṇā asks us to offer that same gentleness to ourselves. This is where many people struggle. We find it easier to forgive others than ourselves. We criticize ourselves for caring too much, for staying too long, for missing someone who could not meet us emotionally. The inner voice becomes harsh. I should have known better. I'm weak. I'll never change. Yet, every harsh judgment quietly strengthens the very insecurity we are trying to heal. The Buddha repeatedly emphasized that hatred cannot end hatred. It can only create more suffering. The same is true within ourselves. Self-contempt cannot produce inner freedom. Only understanding can. Perhaps this is why awakening begins not with perfection, but with honesty. the honest recognition that we are all learning how to love. Some of us learned fear before trust. Some learned performance before acceptance. Some learned to chase affection because affection once felt uncertain. These patterns deserve awareness, not condemnation. As mindfulness deepens, something remarkable begins happening. We stop seeing ourselves as broken. Instead, we begin seeing conditioning. Habits, patterns, mental formations, and what has been conditioned can gradually be transformed. The Buddha compared this transformation to cultivating a garden. A gardener cannot force a flower to bloom overnight, but they can prepare the conditions. Healthy soil, water, sunlight, patience. Our minds grow in the same way. Every moment of mindfulness prepares the soil. Every act of compassion nourishes it. Every practice of loving kindness allows something healthier to take root. Eventually, the garden changes. Not because one dramatic event transformed everything, but because countless small moments accumulated over time. This is how freedom develops, quietly, almost invisibly, until one day you notice something astonishing. The person who once consumed your thoughts no longer occupies your mind in the same way, not because you forced yourself to forget them, but because the hunger that once chased them has softened. The relationship has changed because the relationship within your own mind has changed. This is perhaps the greatest miracle in Buddhist psychology. Reality does not always need to change before suffering begins to dissolve. Sometimes awareness changes first. Then the world appears different. Imagine looking through a dusty window. At first, everything outside seems blurred. You might assume the landscape itself is unclear, but when the glass is cleaned, you realize the world had not changed, only your way of seeing it. Craving is like dust upon the window of the heart. Mindfulness gently wipes it away. Compassion keeps the heart open. Loving kindness allows love to flow without fear, and slowly, another kind of relationship becomes possible. Not one built upon emotional bargaining, not one sustained by uncertainty, not one fueled by the endless need to prove our worth, but one rooted in freedom. Freedom to appreciate another person without possessing them. Freedom to remain present without demanding guarantees. Freedom to love without turning love into survival. This freedom changes the way we choose partners. Emotionally unavailable people may still appear in our lives, but they no longer awaken the same unconscious pursuit. Why? Because we stop confusing emotional distance with emotional value. We stop mistaking anxiety for chemistry. We stop believing that being chosen determines our worth. Instead, we begin recognizing a quieter kind of attraction. Consistency, presence, honesty, emotional availability. At first, these qualities may even feel unfamiliar, perhaps less dramatic, less intoxicating. But slowly we discover something extraordinary. Peace has its own beauty. The nervous system no longer waits anxiously for the next message. The mind no longer spends entire nights interpreting silence. Love becomes restful, not because life has become perfect, but because fear no longer occupies the center of the relationship. This is the love the Buddha points toward. Not a love free from change, not a love free from loss, but a love free from illusion. A love that understands every meeting contains the possibility of parting. Every embrace contains the certainty of impermanence, and yet chooses to love anyway, not because it expects forever, but because it fully inhabits this moment. This is perhaps one of the deepest paradoxes in Buddhism. When we stop demanding that love last forever, we become capable of loving more completely today. When we stop asking another person to rescue us, we become more available to truly meet them. When we stop clinging to happiness, we begin noticing how quietly happiness has always visited the present moment. Perhaps emotionally unavailable people entered our lives for reasons we never expected, not because they were meant to complete us, but because they revealed the places where we had abandoned ourselves, not because they held the missing piece of our heart, but because they illuminated the beliefs that convinced us our heart was incomplete. In that sense, even painful relationships can become teachers, not teachers of cynicism, not teachers of distrust, but teachers of awareness. They invite us to ask better questions, not, "Why wasn't I enough?" but, "What was I hoping another person would give me that I had never learned to offer myself?" The answer to that question cannot be found in another relationship. It can only be discovered in the quiet work of knowing the mind. This is the path the Buddha described more than 25 centuries ago, a path that begins with seeing suffering honestly, continues through understanding its causes, and ends, not in emotional isolation, but in profound freedom. The freedom to love without clinging, to care without controlling, to remain open without becoming dependent, to let another person walk beside you, rather than carrying the impossible burden of becoming your entire world. And perhaps this is the greatest transformation of all. You no longer seek someone to complete your life. You become someone capable of sharing a complete heart. Not because life is suddenly free of pain, but because your peace is no longer built upon conditions that life can take away. The Buddha never promised that love would always remain. He never promised that every relationship would endure. He never promised a heart that would never grieve. He offered something far more enduring, a mind that can meet love with gratitude, meet loss with wisdom, meet change with compassion, and meet every new relationship without carrying the chains of the old. That is the quiet freedom at the heart of Buddhist psychology, and perhaps it is the kind of love we were searching for all along.